Hi, this is Mr. YY, and today we're going to have a crash course into the healthcare and life science sector. This is a two-part video. The first part, I will cover more of the components of the healthcare and life science sector, and the second part is where I'll dive into the life science sector, talking about the trends and some of the dynamics in there. So this is my first ever YouTube video, and I hope you enjoy it. If you feel that I'm going too slowly, feel free to go to the play speed setting and set at 1.5 times. Don't say I didn't teach you anything today. So, about the healthcare and life science industry, it is a massive industry. It is actually the second largest constituent of the S&P 500. So you can think of healthcare and life science as two separate segments, right? Like as though you are watching a movie. The healthcare would be essentially the actors or the scenes, while the life science is more of the cameraman, the directors who are actually filming the movie. So you don't actually see them, but they're actually working around the background, in the background, to provide the service that you actually receive in the end. So now, let me talk about the players of the healthcare sector. The healthcare sectors are very obvious to patients because they are, you see them all the time. So they include commonly your GP practice, your primary care providers, your hospitals, so your secondary care providers, your high street health providers, people who test your eyesight, provide you with cosmetics services, provide you with IVF treatments, your pharmacies that provide you with the drugs, and as well as all the specialist health provider, like your mental health providers, your physiotherapies. And if you think about it as well, it also includes, depending on where you draw the line, it also includes like childcare, specialist education providers, and even funeral services. So if you think about it, it's a spectrum from birth all the way to death. So that's how I see healthcare. Of course, there's also adjacent sectors such as your insurance or your health tech and other players. Feel free to drop in the comments box below what other players you think will be within this healthcare sector, and if you have any questions, I can try to address them there. Now, let's move on to the life science sector. The life science sector is one that I feel very exciting because basically it's driven by a lot of science and technology innovations, right? And you can break it down into three main buckets. The first bucket is your pharma, biotech, or your med device company. These are the companies that are driving the innovations. They are the companies, if the simplest way to put it is that they own the IP, the intellectual properties of the treatments, of drugs, of the devices. The second bucket is the bucket that is called the pharma outsourced services provider, or just the outsourced service providers. And the last but not least is the med tech companies. So a long time ago, all the pharmas and med device companies and biotechs, what they do is they do everything in-house. They've got a team of scientists, they've got a team of salespeople, they've got teams of researchers, everybody under one roof to develop the treatment. But over the last decade or so, we see a lot of cost and also revenue pressure, right, that squeeze their margin really tightly. And one very good evidence of this is Deloitte publishes annual reports on the return on pharma investments, and I've put a link down in the bio below as well, so you feel free to refer to them. But on a very high level, the revenue pressure comes from declining number of diseases, whereby a drug company actually prepare or create a blockbuster drug. I'll go more into blockbuster drugs in the next video where I talk about life science. Secondly, a lot of these patents or the intellectual properties which I mentioned earlier are actually expiring. So there's an expiry date to all these IPs, and once they expire, what happens is that the drug becomes a generic, and their competitors can actually produce the same drug. So there's basically no more barriers to entry. That would inevitably result in a reduce in the revenue, right? From a cost perspective, to create a drug is not cheap. It's very, very expensive. So if you think about it, I'm researching a drug at the moment, and I don't know when or how much I'll be able to make once when I complete my research, right? So I'll be throwing in a lot of money, a lot of time, resources, but with no endpoint or with no certainty. So both of these factors coming together results in the pharma or biotech company having to start thinking about outsourcing their services, right? So now let's move on to the outsourced pharma space. So the outsourced service providers have different verticals. Just think of it as though you are dissecting the whole pharma company into different components, different divisions. So first and foremost, we have the research and development, so the R&D function. So these organizations are called the CROs, or the contract research organizations. These companies focus on drug discovery, on clinical trials, and some of the key terms that you might come about when you think about, say, drug discovery or so is in vitro, in vivo, in silico. In vivo is basically within the body compared to relative to ex vivo, which is outside the body. In vitro is, if you think about IVF, so IVF is your test tube babies, right? So that is within a medium, within a culture, within a test tube, within a petri dish. So that is in vitro. In silico is quite a new term, whereby it is in the computer. So they run simulations, they run a lot of complex algorithms. So you can imagine there's going to be a lot of AI involved in these days. Now let me talk about also, in terms of research-wise, the different phases of clinical trial. So we all seen a lot of the COVID-related news these days, talking about how the vaccines program, the progression of the vaccine development. And basically, to create a drug, it takes a couple of stages of testing. The first one is called preclinical trial. So preclinical trial is essentially to test the safety profile of the drug. And it's not administered to humans. It's only administered to animals to see whether can they even be ingested, taken in, how does it look like. And then when it passes preclinical trial, it will then move on into phase 1, 2, 3, and maybe 4, phase 4. Within phase 1 to 3, essentially, it is the same test going through larger pool of people, basically. And the two things that they test is still safety, for sure, and efficacy. So efficacy means whether the drug have a intended response or produce intended results. So if a drug, let's say, is meant to relieve fever, but it cure cold instead but doesn't relieve fever, then it doesn't work, right? It's not efficacious. So as the phases progress throughout phase 1 to 3, there's more and more tests to make sure that it works. And only after passing phase 3 will a drug get approved. So then what happens when the drug gets approved, it gets commercialized, you can actually sell it. Okay, so essentially a drug that is passed through phase 3 within a particular country would be called like a licensed medicine. But if, let's say, if you're selling a drug within a country that doesn't have the license, but it's licensed or approved somewhere else, then it's considered an unlicensed medicine, and it's actually legal to do so. Yeah. When a drug is approved and commercialized as well, you can actually there might be a phase 4 test. This phase 4 test is actually a test, a post-monitoring test, also to test for safety. And sometimes the term used for it is called pharmacovigilance. Okay, so that's the first vertical, contract research organization, right? Now moving on to the second vertical, we'll talk about logistics. So if you think about it, logistics are essentially your FedEx and DHL. But drugs are of a more sensitive, a more complex nature, right? So they require some specialist logistics knowledge. Furthermore, there are some drugs like biologics, which I'll talk about in the next video, where it's actually living materials, living matters, right? It's proteins, it's part of the body. So these drugs have to be transported in a very temperature control manner. And sometimes it has to be as low as -100 degrees Celsius. So it's called cryo freezing. So not just any supermarket van delivery can actually transport your medicine. It has to be a specialist logistics function. Next, we talk about the CMO providers. So these are your contract development and manufacturing organization. So these organizations, or essentially what they provide, is a specialist manufacturing facility. So if you imagine, it's essentially think about Nike and all the overseas production facilities, right? They don't own the site, but they outsource, they contract out the production of the sneakers or the shoes to all these facilities. It's the same. Next, the fourth vertical, we have got regulatory and compliance. So regulatory and compliance, to have a drug getting final approval, right? To get a drug through all these navigate through all these different complex maze of approvals, of regulatory bodies. Drug companies normally need someone who's well versed in all this application process. So they're there to basically make sure that the approval process or the application process is as smooth as possible. So after approval, we also have the distributors. So the fifth vertical is your distributors. So think about that as basically, if you're a small producer, you have one drug, two drug, right? You would struggle to reach out to all the different retailers across either a country, across the globe, to try to sell a product. With a distributor, they have their distribution network, and not surprisingly, a lot of distributors actually owns pharmacy chains. So the larger ones like McKesson or Alliance, they have got large presence in the retail space as well. So distributor is the fifth vertical. And I think the last but not least, you also have to have your sales and marketing. So outsource sales and marketing function, if the most common player that you think about is probably your players like WPP, Carta Health, your marketing and communication company. But in the healthcare sector, there's market access is also very critical, because imagine if a drug have got two different a disease or illness have two different competing treatments, which one should the doctor actually prescribe? So the drug company have to actually convince the healthcare provider to actually prescribe their drug, and that itself, market access itself, is essentially bringing the drug to market all the way to the hands of the final patient. And so talking about just now the doctors, right? How do they actually determine it? The key term is effectiveness. So what is effectiveness? It is whereby a drug have got either less side effect, takes a shorter treatment period, or maybe cause or result in a lower burden to the health system, right? Those are basically factors to determine whether is a drug more effective than the other, and that will drive actually whether someone or a doctor is willing to prescribe that drug. And if you think about it, these days there's a lot of data, there's a lot of health data around, right? So real world data and real world evidence is getting very, very critical within the healthcare industry. And so data analytics and data mining companies are actually increasingly more and more important, play a more important role within this sales and marketing vertical. So these 6 categories are essentially on high level the outsourced service providers. So there's one more category, which is your medtech companies. They are very, very important because these companies are the ones that provide the scientists, the researchers, the tools, the equipments, and also the diagnostics facilities or services for them to actually enable them to create all these groundbreaking researchers. So medtech companies are a key component to the whole healthcare life science ecosystem as well. So this is a very quick canter through of the players within the healthcare and life science sector. I hope you have enjoyed the video, and also if you enjoyed it and found it informative, feel free to like it or share it, and also don't forget to go to the next video and watch my and have a more deeper dive into the life science sector. Thank you very much.